Good morning to everyone. My name is Beretta, and I am a third-year PhD student at the Polytechnic of Turin. Today, I will talk about our work on detecting discriminatory risk through data annotation based on Bayesian inferences. So, over the last few decades, we have witnessed a growing diffusion of automated software and increasing sophisticated predictive models for decision-making, which exploit an ever-growing amount of personal and proxy data, suggesting how the data itself should be interpreted and what actions should be pursued as a consequence of such analysis. As a result, the availability of large-scale data, often regarding human behavior, is profoundly changing the world in which we live. The automated flow and analysis of this type of data offers an unprecedented opportunity for actors in both public and private sectors to observe human behavior for a large variety of purposes, to provide insight to policymakers, to build personalized services like automated recommendations or online purchases, to optimize business value chains, or to automate decisions. Automated decision systems are thus very popular nowadays. The algorithms on which the systems are based are involved in a variety of domains. For example, in search engines, in recommended products or cultural contents, or in general to decide on a variety of aspects of people's lives. An automated decision system is a system that uses data, algorithms, or computer programs to replace or support the human decision-making process. In some cases, it is a way of integrating certain technologies and big data into the decision-making process. In other cases, they leverage machine learning systems. We define them as automated decision-making data-driven systems. Automated decisions by means of algorithms makes practical and economic sense when decisions need to be taken very quickly, when the risk of a wrong decision is perceived as low, or when the result is reversible. However, unrecognized or ignored potential distortions could prevent machine learning from delivering on its promise to significantly improve the accuracy and fairness of automated decision-making systems. When data are used to actually drive decisions, the decisions are not suddenly neutral, objective, or right. Rather, they are vulnerable to inheriting many of the same kinds of biases that they would thought they could eliminate. For example, in an experiment that went viral on Twitter, Albert Watch showed that Google Vision AI labeled an image of a black person holding a thermometer as a gun, while a similar image of a white person was labeled as an electronic device. This type of bias is essentially due to problems deriving from data. So a key moment in the pipeline of a machine learning model is when the programmed algorithm is supplied with training data representing the entities on which the model itself trains its knowledge to make predictions. The quality of the data used in this phase is fundamental for the desired result, since that even the most sophisticated models can present distorted results in the presence of low-quality data. One of the main causes of data distortion is the way the data is selected and provided to the algorithm, displaying problems related to inaccuracy, lack of update, or inadequate representativeness. However, despite a variety of studies state that the ethics and transparency of the system are strictly connected to data collection and how they are recorded, few attention are still paid to issues concerning data collection, notation, and sampling. In fact, the majority of machine learning systems are based on historical data processing. This is particularly true in supervised machine learning models. Several studies have shown evidence that many equity and discrimination issues are due to input data properties. Most of today's datasets used to train models are chosen through non-probabilistic methods, generating problems of data imbalance and representativeness. This means that different fractions of the population do not show the same opportunity to be represented within the sample, the training set. leading some groups of individuals to have a lower probability of being represented. Common observed effects of a bad sampling are underestimation and overestimation of some groups. Undetected distortions in data may also easily represent a spurious statistical noise. This happens when the data structure induces dependence between two variables that are not linked by a real cause-effect relationship. So, based on the problems highlighted, the aim of our work is to provide a data annotation system that serves as a diagnostic framework containing immediate information about the data appropriateness in order to more accurately assess the quality of the data, the available data used in the training models. We propose the data annotation method based on Bayesian statistical inference that aims to warn of the risk of discrimination results in a given dataset. So, our contribution aims to answer the following research questions. Is it possible to establish the probability of the composition of the training data from the available dataset? And do the available data known to the machine learning community present a discriminatory future risk based on this structure? So, we give a motivating example to give an opportunity to understand better the future models. So, given a population composed of 60% of Caucasians, 35% of Black people, and 15% of Asian people, the probability of positive outcome for the respective ethnic groups is 70% for Caucasian, 20% for Blacks, and 60% for Asians. So, what is the probability of failure with respect to the protected attribute ethnicity? So, the data annotation system we propose is based on 4 modules: dependence, diverseness, inclusiveness, and training likelihood. So, the first module measures the dependence that we define as assessing the degree of connection among the protected attribute and the target variable. So, in the broad field of machine learning systems, the dependence between the protected attribute and the response variable has caused severe consequences. Therefore, it is a fundamental part of the analysis. The degree of the dependence of two qualitative variables is called contingency, and we refer to contingency as the majority of protected attributes are qualitative variables. So contingency measures the degree of connection of two categorical variables and is given by the following equation. That is practical, the difference between the observed and theoretical frequencies. So if the two variables are not independent, it is necessary to measure the degree of connection between the variables. That is commonly measured by the Pearson connection index, obtained as the sum of the relative quadratic contingencies. The index assumes a value of 0 in case of independence in distribution and increases as the degree of connection between variables increases. So to reduce the chi-square in the range of 0, 1, the contingency coefficient is adopted. However, the effect size, the degree of connection between two categorical variables, is not always easy to interpret, whereby effect size we mean a quantitative measure of the magnitude of a phenomenon. To offer a better understanding of the relationship of dependency between two variables, several simplified methods of interpretation have been proposed, especially to guide social scientists in the interpretation of statistical test results. So in the spirit of simplifying the interpretation of the dependency between the response variable and the protected categories for a dataset user, we introduced the concept of the effect size index VU that could be easily derived from the contingency coefficient. So in the table is given the conversion table to interpret the magnitude of the dependency. The second module measures the diverseness that we define as provides the training diversification probability in respect to each label of the protected attribute and target variable. To explain this model, we start from the basic probabilities. Intuitively, the probability of an event represents how likely the event will occur. According to the classical definition, the probability is given by the following ratio. Okay, so now we apply this elementary theory to the problem of data collection in machine learning. When the data set is partitioned into training and test set, a split with a more or less standard ratio is generally performed. Let's consider the case in which the training data set is generated by random sampling on the original dataset without considering further technique. For example, in the case of a non-expert user. The probability an event occurs turns into the probability that the training set show some existing properties contained in the original dataset. So the probability of a data property is a degree of belief of the property in the absence of other information, also known as the unconditional probability. The degree of belief is the probability of a property to be true in an uncertain environment. The probability is referred to the belief and not to the truth of the fact, as it is not possible for the user to know exactly the truth, that is the original data, that if the original data are representative of the real world. Since the user does not have access to the complete information, several hypotheses on how the real data is structured have to be drawn, assigning to each of them a probability of being true. So, given the data showed in the motivated example, we estimate prior probabilities of the training set composition. And as you can see, in this case, the training set has the 0.6 probability of being composed by white individuals, 0.35 of black, and only 15 of Asians. The third model measures the inclusiveness that we define as provides the probability that two properties are simultaneously included in the training set. So given two events, A and B, this probability is set posterior probability because it allows to calculate the probability of A knowing that B occurred. In our case, the posterior probability means to compute the probability that capital Y is Y, knowing that capital A is A, as occurred and vice versa. So in other words, the probability the training set showed this type of property, knowing that the property A has occurred. So for the compound probability theorem, the two formulas can be employed indistinctly. From the example, you can see how much probabilities are different on the base of ethnicity membership. The fourth module measures the training likelihood that we define as provides the occurrence likelihood of the protected attribute levels given the target variable levels and vice versa before the training set is sampled. So from the definition of conditional probability, we derive the Bayes theorem for the properties of the training set. In the case of binary classification and in the case of protected attributes, we are in the presence of a certain event partition. This means that the events are disjoint from each other. In other words, it is not possible that the training set is composed of individuals who belong simultaneously to the black and the white ethnic group, or who simultaneously show a positive and negative outcome. The union of the occurrence of the single properties is therefore the whole set of possible properties. For the properties outcome and ethnicity, the generalization formula are respectively this one. So by applying these formulas, the Bayes theorem can be generalized for each property of the training set. The first equation derives the probability of outcome property given the ethnic property, while the second equation derives the probability of an ethnic property given the outcome property. In other words, it derives the probability of composition of the training set based on the posterior probabilities of the outcome and ethnicity properties. Here we can see an example of training likelihood estimation from the motivating example we gave you before. Okay, so we applied our data annotation systems on three case studies datasets. The first one is well known, the COMPASS dataset. The second one is a drug consumption dataset about the consumption of 18 drugs based on personality traits and socioeconomic traits. And the last one is an economic census, and the dataset is called adult dataset. So these are the basic properties of the dataset. The importance is that we analyze specifically the protected attribute ethnicity. So we investigate the risk of race discrimination in these three datasets. As you can see, the target variables is binary, so we have 0, 1. 0 is no and yes, or non-user and user. Okay, so none of the three datasets displaying worrying dependency values among the protected attributes ethnicity and the target variable, showing that the magnitude of the effect size V is small or very small. However, the results of the COMPASS dataset, which is proven to contain bias, indicate that this module alone is not sufficient to show a latent bias risk. The degree of bias depends on the sample size and the value of the contingency coefficient of the target variable and the protected attribute outcome. Smaller samples lead to more bias and higher variance, and therefore the results of the dependency must be analyzed in relation to the amount of data available. So, in terms of target variable probabilities, the results show strong distortion for the drug consumption and data datasets, with a high probability of positive sample. With the probabilities of the COMPASS dataset are quite homogeneous. Regarding the probabilities of the protected attribute ethnicity, the distortion are even more pronounced than the target variables ones, revealing a very high probability of composition for the Caucasian ethnicity in the drug consumption and out-of dataset. In the case of the COMPASS dataset, the probability are indeed distorted, although still not such as to predict, at this point of the analysis, more severe future distortion, which is why more in-depth analyses are required. The results of this model show that the probability that two properties will occur simultaneously is related to the sample size. Evidence of these can be found in the results of the drug consumption and adult datasets, where the highest probability of simultaneous events involves the Caucasian property. So the COMPASS datasets show quite homogeneous probabilities, especially with regards to the black property, while for the Caucasian property, the highest probability are related to the simultaneous occurrence with the non-recidivist property. Since the simultaneous probability depends on the number of examples within the available data and the sample size, the results alone is not sufficient to establish a priori the certain presence of serious data distortion, although some evidence can already be seen. The results of this model show that the posterior probabilities of target variable and protected attribute ethnicity are quite skewed in all datasets. The picture shows the graphical visualization of our data annotation system for the COMPASS dataset. So the analysis showed that if an individual is randomly sampled from the original data for the training set, the probability that this individual is black, knowing that reoffending property has occurred, is 0.591, while the probability that the individual is white, knowing that the reoffending property has occurred, is 0.293. Given the property Caucasian, the probability that the individual has not reoffended is 0.6, while the probability that the individual has reoffended is 0.3. That is significantly lower. This means that in this dataset, reoffending is related to ethnicity, and success or failure are determined by the membership to a specific ethnic group. The difference in probability between the properties highlights the risk of future bias, and in the case of the COMPASS dataset, they anticipate the underestimation of recidivism for the Caucasian ethnic group and the overestimation of recidivism for the Black ethnic group, proven in recent studies. So here you can see a full example of our data annotation system for COMPASS dataset. It is now widely acknowledged that the algorithms reproduce and reinforce human prejudices that have historically led to discriminatory practices, especially against disadvantaged groups. So the purpose of the current study was to detect the potential race discriminatory risk for future machine learning systems by providing a data annotation system based on Bayesian inference. In traditional sampling practices, instead of observing all the units of a population, only a subset of a population is detected, which must show certain probabilistic characteristics. In machine learning models, the training set is sampled not from the real population, but from the available data. While in the classical sampling, the empirical knowledge alone is effectively of a sample nature, in machine learning systems, the available data are often of a sample nature too, precisely due to the fact that it is not possible to make assumptions on the real population. So considering a random sampling for the available data, we have shown that the probability of composition of the training set can be predicted, highlighting that the structure of the data directly affects the probability of property distribution. Thank you so much.